I think since the refresh and the One Big Beautiful Bill, it's certainly gathered, a lot of attention. So today we'd just like to talk about how they work and how the program has evolved since the beginning. So if we look back in the maybe take a ride in the time machine, we can see when the program was originated. It was about 6 years after the great financial crisis in 2014, and the economy was recovering, but unfortunately there was a growing gap between low and high income areas. So that attracted the attention of policymakers and legislators who began working on a plan so they could address this disparity. And this ultimately resulted in their creation as a temporary pilot program. And that was in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, or TCJA. And the first version of Opportunity Zones is what people generally refer to as OZ1. So the bottom line is OZs were basically created to address this very noticeable disparity between these types of areas, and they were located in distinct geographic areas throughout the United States. So yeah, next slide. I'm sorry, Ava, I know you're flipping the slides for me. And so yes, we're together. Okay, so what are OZs? They're basically by the way, I'm going to say OZ because Opportunity Zone is about several syllables longer, so I'm going with OZs. Anyway, OZs you might consider an economic policy tool. And basically it's a little different because instead of a grant or loan or something like that, it's a tax benefit that's designed to guide private investment into these distressed areas. And the distressed areas are identified by census tract number. So the designation process for these zones begins with a list of eligible tracts based on economic and demographic criteria, and then that's followed by nominations by state governors after their vetting process, and then finally the zones are certified by the federal government. Essentially, it's the Treasury and the IRS, which is part of Treasury. But the key point is that these OZ designations are driven by U.S. Census Bureau data. That determines eligibility prior to nomination. Next slide, Ava, please. So the Florida zones, Florida evaluated over 1,000 tracts that were eligible. And then this led to the nomination and certification in 2018 of 427 opportunity zones located in each of the 67 counties in Florida. So next slide, please. Not quite sure why I'm not showing up there. But anyway, so under IRS rules, the program begins when an investor generates a capital gain, and that's critical. Everyone should take that away, is that the program starts when an investor, a private investor, has a capital gain and they're looking to have a better situation than paying the tax on the gain. So the investor has a 180-day window to deploy their gain into a QOF, which is a qualified opportunity fund that they set up either for themselves or they can invest in someone else's QOF. But QOFs have to self-certify using a couple of IRS forms and potentially others depending on their situation. So Form 8996 basically reports the certification and compliance of the fund, while Form 8997 tracks the individual investors holding in the fund. So that's the disclosure that they've been doing up till now. So the forms basically ensure the fund and its investors are in compliance with Opportunity Zone investments. So next slide. So In terms of eligible capital assets, this is one of the kind of neat things about the program. The IRS has allowed for a wide variety of capital gains on different assets. So it can include financial assets like stocks and bonds, real estate, either commercial or investment properties, or even alternative assets, including cryptocurrencies, business interests, collectibles like art, automobiles, or jewelry. So this flexibility allows diverse sources of capital to be redirected into localized projects. The bottom line is federal rules allow eligible capital gains to be generated through the sale of most types of assets. Next slide. So OZ funds are allowed to invest in a wide range of projects as well. So a wide range of capital gains and a wide range of projects. However, while fund use is flexible, the law does explicitly prohibit certain statutorily excluded projects, and these are generally leisure types of businesses like golf courses, country clubs, uh, suntan facilities, racetracks, uh, and liquor stores, that type of thing. So the bottom line is OZ investments are flexible, but they restrict certain activities, and the goal is to focus more productive economic activity in the zones. Next slide. So the three core benefits to investors are: first, there's a tax deferral on the original gain. Second, there's a 10% basis step up when the investment is held for 5 years. And number three, the permanent exclusion of capital gains tax on any new appreciation from the investment, provided it is held for at least 10 years. And that's really essentially the crown jewel of the investment. They're trying to invest, or I'm sorry, they're trying to attract long-term investors or patient capital. And that's why the benefits kind of get better the longer you hold it. So, and the idea is to make the benefits good enough so as to attract the private capital to go into these zones. So next slide, please. So the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBA, passed on July 4th, 2025, essentially updated the OZ program. So OBA altered the timeline, incentives, mechanics, oversight, and reporting requirements. And this transformation we basically call OZ2. The key point is OBA has reformed the temporary pilot program now into a more permanent economic development program. So OZ1 has become OZ2. So next slide, please. So OZ1 was temporary, and investors had to work against the sunset date of December 31st, 2026. The 26 deadline was repealed in OZ2 to allow investors to continue deferring capital gains beyond that date. So by repealing the deadline, OZ2 is now has been made more of a permanent part of the tax code. The key here is that permanence is far better for both long-term capital planning and investment. Next slide, please. Under the original rules, designations were static and based on 2010 census data, but the new framework basically establishes a decennial redesignation period, or in other words, this map refreshes every 10 years. So this helps to ensure that OZs will continue to be aligned with current economic conditions. So every 10 years, tracks will be reevaluated against the most current economic and demographic data available at the time. Next slide, please. OZ2 established a new nomination timeline. So beginning July 1st, 2026, state governors will have 90 days to nominate new tracks. This is potentially followed by a 30-day extension period, so that would be 4 months essentially. And then that's followed by a 60-day or 2-month Treasury certification process, U.S. Treasury. The new federal designations will then take effect on January 1st, 2027. So July 1st into where they review it November, December, and then they're finally certified sometime in late December, and they become effective in January 27, which really gives the program a fresh start. So next slide, please. There's new eligibility criteria as well, and the new standards are a little tighter. So now to be eligible, new tracks have to meet one of two criteria: a median family income of 70% or less than the area median family income, or a poverty rate of at least 20%, provided the MFI does not exceed 125% of that area. So again, this is designed to direct the capital to more distressed census tracts. Next slide, please. So this slide compares tract totals at various stages in the process between the 2017 cycle and what is projected for 2026. And these numbers here were based on 2019 to 2023, the 5-year American Community Survey, which is done by the Census Bureau. However, new survey results were released last Thursday on January 29th, but Treasury is still evaluating the data before it publishes its official eligibility list, and this should include designation of rural and non-rural tracts, which, as we'll see in a few minutes, that's important. So the other thing you can see is OZ2 reduces the number of eligible tracts due to the stricter criteria, but we believe that there's going to be over 1,300 tracts eligible in our state. The table also reflects the federal government's overriding goal, and that's to focus on tracts with the highest demonstrated need and the greatest potential for revitalization. It's important to note, though, that the Census Bureau determines the OZ eligibility. Next slide, please. There's a new rolling deferral clock. So under OZ1, all federal tax deferrals shared the same end date, but now OZ2 has incorporated a rolling 5-year deferral clock. So this means each investment now has its own timeline. So for example, an investment made in 2027 would be recognized in 2032 and so on. So this appeals to investors and creates more of a steady investment pipeline for projects. So as opposed to having all investments adhering to a single federal deadline. So tax deferral recognition is now based on the date of each individual investment. Next slide, please. OZ2 did reinstate the 10% basis step up for investments held at least 5 years. And because the rolling clock makes this incentive achievable for any 5-year period going forward, it eliminates a rush to invest by that single date as previously. OZ2 did eliminate the 7-year 15% step up mainly to simplify the administration of the program, because quite frankly there was a little confusion there when we first got started with OZ1. Bottom line is federal rules now ensure that 10% tax reduction is accessible for all new investments held at least 5 years. So next slide, please. Here's where we mentioned rural a minute or two ago. So OZ1 didn't include any special benefits for rural areas, but OZ2 does. I know this is important here to this audience. And where rural area is defined as any location not a city or town with a population of greater than 50,000 inhabitants, or could be an urbanized area contiguous and adjacent to that city or town. So what does OZ2 do? It created qualified rural opportunity funds, AKQROFs, or we're calling them CROFs. And these qualify for a 30% basis step up, which is triple the standard non-rural rate. So that kind of supercharges the step up. OZ2 also lowers the substantial improvement threshold for rural projects from 100% to 50%. What does that mean? That basically means in a non-rural area, and formerly rural areas, the improvement had to be equal to the cost basis of the investment. Now, rural areas, it has to be 50%. So this can improve things like Main Street revitalizations in smaller towns and so forth. And again, this highlights the federal government's priority of targeting investments into these areas. So next slide, please. OZ2 creates an interim period between the 2027 implementation of OZ tracks, but they've also said that OZ1 tracks won't expire until December 31st, 2028. So this basically gives current OZ investors a question or decision whether they want to deploy their capital gains into QOFs before December 31st, 2028 to leverage the current tax benefits under OZ1, or they could delay their investment until 2027 to take full advantage of the new features of OZ2. So while pre-2027 investments didn't receive an extension of their 26 deferral date, OZ2 honors the zone status and other provisions from OZ1. In other words, OZ1 and the interim period basically preserves the original terms for existing investors in order to maintain some stability here, while also offering them the ability to invest in the new OZ2 framework. Next slide, please. So OZ1 was criticized for the lack of data that people wanted to evaluate the program outcomes. We would basically get several calls on that. How is this working out, or do we know about this or that? And of course, we really didn't have any data. Nobody did. So to address this, OZ2 now mandates additional reporting. So participants have to provide annual disclosures to ensure basically measurable accountability and provide annual data on job creation and investment types, things of that nature. The Treasury also has to file reports, again, so people can better evaluate the program's impact. The concept is federal oversight has moved now toward more accountability, transparency, and data-driven results. So next slide, please. OZ1 required investors to sell by December 31st, 2047 to claim their tax-free appreciation benefit. Once again, this was a single date. So what OZ2 does is it eliminates the deadline in favor of a more flexible 30-year period for OZ2 investments that are made starting in 2027. Much like the 5-year rolling deferral period, now we have a 30-year period for this. And again, these are part of making this program permanent as opposed to a pilot program. So next slide, please. By providing the permanence and also clear rules, the federal government basically says, hey, the OZs are here to stay, and investors appreciate this kind of stability. So before they commit long-term capital. And so in other words, the federal government is really wanting to foster a more strategic and long-term approach to the deployment of new OZ2 capital. And this essentially creates sort of a unique asset class, if you will. Next slide, please. The OZ2 timeline provided in the OBA is designed for a nomination process to begin July 1st, 2026, as we've said, with qualification by December 31st, 2026, and the new zones taking effect on January 2027. Just a sort of a refresh on the timeline. They're gearing toward basically a full implementation of OZ2 on January 1st, 2027, including, of course, that 2-year transition period between OZ1 and OZ2 that we discussed. Next slide, please. So Florida has one of the most extensive infrastructure networks in the country and has a multitude of critical assets like nowhere else, as we know. 16 seaports and maritime industrial bases, 21 commercial service airports, 130 total public use airports, which includes our 4 major hubs, 21 major military installations, including 3 combat commands, 3 spaceports, and 7 total spaceport territories, several major rail and road transportation corridors, including intermodals, major sports hubs that encourage multimodal transportation and regional commerce, and finally a premier educational infrastructure consisting of numerous universities, state colleges, and technical schools. And I have to say on a personal note, anybody who's had kids going to college and has bright futures realizes how many choices there are in terms of where to go to school. So, in other words, aligning the OZ2 portfolio with our robust infrastructure will provide the maximum benefit of the program for our state. So next slide, please. So OZs, we're thinking, should complement special designations also, like free trade zones and maritime industrial zones, and ideally aligned with fiscally constrained and economically distressed designations throughout Florida, including, of course, the OZ1 zones, 19 free trade zones, maritime industrial zones when they're created, 3 rural areas of opportunity, 29 fiscally constrained counties, 31 rural counties and small cities, the Florida Chamber Foundation's Prosperity Initiative, which uses Florida zip code model to address childhood poverty, critical food security and agriculture production sites for agricultural facilities, water, timber, minerals, etc., and any verified pad-ready industrial and commercial sites. Workforce is another key consideration and important part of the overall strategy to capitalize on these synergies and ensure that federal tax policy and state economic incentives are working together to achieve the best result. So next slide, please. Okay, so local input and feedback is very important to this process and to Florida commerce. So we're now accepting track recommendations through our official survey portal. You can scan the QR code shown here, or you can go to our web page at www.floridajobs.org, and we're requesting completed submissions by April 1st, 2026, if possible. So we invite you to visit the web page regularly for more information and also updated content. So I'd just like to say, in conclusion, thank you for your time today. The OZ program really is designed to help build a stronger Florida through the application of an important federal tax policy partnered with state and local insight. So I'm happy to answer any questions, or you can also send them to the mailbox listed on our webpage. So thank you, guys.